The colony should have died. That was the simple truth buried in the footnote. Not a dramatic truth. Not the kind that got recorded in history books or carved into monuments. Just a quiet, administrative truth, sitting in a 300-year-old cargo manifest. In a font so small, Solon Adare had to lean forward in his chair to read it. Rerouted consignment medical-grade antivirals, Class 4. Destination amended. Human colony Verith, 7. Authorization. Vethera Trade House. No compensation requested. He read it twice. Then a third time. Then he sat back and looked at the ceiling of his small office on the station and said nothing for a long time. Solon Adare was not an important man. That was not false modesty, it was just accurate. He was a mid-level diplomatic attaché, assigned to monitor trade proceedings at the Conclave of Waits, which was itself a mid-level summit, dressed in the costume of something grander. His job was to observe, file reports, shake hands at receptions, and not embarrass the delegation. He was good at all of those things. He was particularly good at not being noticed, which is a skill that looks like nothing from the outside but takes real discipline to maintain. He also read old ledgers, had done it since the academy, when a professor of interstellar economic history had told his class, half bored, that the true story of any civilization was never in its speeches. It was in its invoices. Solon had believed that. Still did. The manifest he was reading now was not supposed to be interesting. He had pulled it from the Vethera Cultural Archive, a small digital collection that the Drathan Compact technically administered and practically ignored while looking for trade route data to cross-reference with. Current docking fees. Routine work. The kind that fills hours and produces nothing anyone reads. But the footnote, Verith, 7. He knew that name. Every human diplomat of a certain age knew that name. The way you know the name of a bridge that almost wasn't built, not because you thought about it often, but because it came up in enough foundational histories that it lodged somewhere. Verith, 7, was one of humanity's earliest deep space colonies. Second wave, planted in a corridor of space that turned out to be harder to supply than anyone had predicted. When the plague hit a respiratory collapse, that the colony's medical infrastructure simply wasn't equipped for the resupply ships, were 3 months out. The colony's population was 60,000. The history books said the resupply arrived in time. They never said someone moved it. Solon pulled up everything he could find on the Vethera Trade House, which was not much. The Vethera were not a species given to self-promotion. They were archivists by nature, patient, long-memoried, precise in their record-keeping and almost invisible in their dealings. They had operated a modest trade network in a quiet corridor of the galaxy for centuries before the Drathan Compact arrived. Now they were a protectorate, which was the Compact's polite word for something that wasn't polite at all. He found 3 more footnotes before midnight. Each one was the same pattern: a Vethera vessel, a rerouted cargo, a human destination in distress, no compensation requested. The dates spanned 40 years. The earliest was during what human historians called the Silence Years, when humanity's colonial expansion had outrun its logistics, its economy, and its ability to respond to crises faster than they multiplied. Dozens of colonies had been on the edge during that period. Several had not survived. More had survived than the official record explained. Solon did not sleep that night. He sat with the manifests and a cold cup of something that had been tea 2 hours ago, and thought about what it meant that a civilization had quietly kept 60,000 humans alive, and then another colony, and then another, and had filed it all under routine rerouting, no compensation requested, and never once mentioned it to anyone. He thought about the Vethera representative he had seen in the main conclave hall that afternoon, Elder Sath. She was old, very old, even by Vethera standards, and she sat in the Protectorate Gallery, which was positioned behind the primary delegate seats and to the left, close enough to observe and far enough to signal that observation was all they were permitted. She had a stillness to her that Solon had noticed, because it was not the stillness of patience. It was the stillness of someone who had learned, over a very long time, that movement costs things. He thought about that for a while. Then he composed a message. Not to his superior in the delegation, not to the trade analysis office. He sent it to an address that most people in the diplomatic corps had never used, an office whose existence was technically public and practically unknown. The Office of Historical Obligations, Earth-based, staffed by 12 people, whose job title on official rosters read simply as Times Archival Reconciliation Specialists. He kept the message short. He attached the manifests. He wrote, "I think someone kept a ledger we forgot to check." He sent it and expected to wait days. The reply came in 4 hours. He almost missed it because he had finally fallen asleep at his desk, face resting on his folded arms, the cold tea pushed to one side. The alert woke him. He opened it with the specific disorientation of someone surfacing from deep water. The message was also short. "We see it. We have seen it for 80 years. We were waiting for the right moment." Solon read that sentence several times. Then he read it again. 80 years. He stood up, walked to the narrow viewport in his office wall. Outside, the station turned slowly against a sky full of other stations, other ships, the quiet machinery of a galactic economy that mostly ran without noticing who it crushed on the way. The Drathan Compact's administrative hub was visible from here, a massive structure, lit and busy at all hours, confident in the particular way that large things are confident. The kind of confidence that comes from never having had to think about what it would cost to lose. Below it, in the Protectorate docking ring, a single Vethera vessel sat still. Solon looked at it for a long time. He had spent his career being unremarkable, attending summits, filing reports, watching large things move, and recording their movement. He had not understood, until this moment, that there might be a kind of work that looked exactly like that patient. Quiet, invisible, and was something else, entirely underneath. The Office of Historical Obligations had been watching for 80 years. He thought about what that meant. The kind of organization you build if you intend to wait that long. The kind of discipline required to hold something that long without spending it too early. The kind of people who understood, at an institutional level, that a debt does not expire just because no one is collecting. He looked at the Vethera ship again. Small. Old. Docked in a ring that wasn't really theirs anymore. He sent one more message to the office. Just 3 words. "I am ready." The reply, this time, took 11 minutes. "Then so are we." The conclave of weights was designed to feel fair. That was important to understand. The Drathan Compact had not built it to look like a cage. They had built it to look like a table long, well lit, with seats for everyone, and refreshments that were always slightly better than expected. The Protectorate species sat in their designated gallery. The trade terms were presented in clear language. The proceedings were recorded and archived. The cage was in the math. Every Protectorate species arrived at the conclave carrying debt from the previous cycle. The debt was always explained, always itemized, always technically accurate. It was also always structured so that the interest accumulated slightly faster than the Protectorate's capacity to earn. Not dramatically faster. Just enough. The Drathan Compact had been doing this for a long time, and they were very good at calibrating the gap between what was possible and what was achievable. Small enough that no one could call it intentional. Large enough that no one ever got out. Solon sat in the observer gallery, a different gallery from the Protectorate's, with slightly better chairs and a direct sightline to the main floor, and watched Elder Sath take her seat. She moved carefully, the way old things move when they have learned the cost of carelessness. She set her documents on the table in front of her with both hands. She did not look around the room. She already knew what was in it. The Drathan consul opened the proceedings with the traditional language about partnership and shared prosperity, which everyone in the room understood was not meant to be believed, only acknowledged. The delegates nodded at the appropriate moments. The Protectorate representatives listened in the way of people who have heard the same speech many times and have stopped counting. Solon watched Elder Sath's hands. She had them folded on the table in front of her, very still. He had noticed this the day before, in a corridor outside the main hall, when a Drathan administrative officer had walked past her, without acknowledgement, not rudely, just completely, as though she were furniture. Her hands had not moved. Her expression had not changed. But something in the set of her shoulders had shifted, just briefly, in the way of a person absorbing something they have absorbed so many times that the body barely registers it anymore. And that is itself the saddest part. He had filed that observation away the same way he filed everything. Quietly. Without knowing yet what it was for. The human delegation occupied 6 seats in the observer gallery. They had attended every conclave for 60 years in this capacity observers, not participants, present by courtesy of a trade access agreement that gave them the right to monitor proceedings in any compact-administered venue. The Drayton found this mildly charming in the way that large institutions find the habits of smaller ones charming with a tolerance that is very close to dismissal. The humans asked questions sometimes. Polite questions. Technical questions about tariff structures and supply chain routing. They took detailed notes. They sent representatives who were always professional, always prepared, always slightly more informed about Vethera trade history than anyone expected, which was noted and then not thought about further. They also brought gifts. Not large gifts, not impressive ones, but specific ones, a piece of Vethara music, restored from a damaged archive and pressed onto a small data tablet, presented to Elder Sathi at the previous conclave by a human representative whose name Solon had looked up, a woman named Petra Wan, who had spent 30 years in the Archival Reconciliation Division and retired quietly afterward. Before that, a collection of botanical samples from a Vethera colony world that the Compact had decommissioned, seeds preserved in a human university's xenobiology vault, returned without ceremony. The Drayton had noted these gestures as sentimental. The word appeared in their internal assessment reports, which Solon had read in the Observer archive. Humans tend toward sentiment. Diplomatically manageable. He looked at his hands now. He was holding a small data pad with the account figures on it. He had been carrying it for 2 days without knowing how to begin the conversation it would require. The Office of Historical Obligations had given him one instruction. Find a way to let her see it before the formal proceedings end. He had been thinking about that instruction ever since. The recess came mid-afternoon. The delegates moved toward the refreshment area. Solon moved toward the Protectorate Gallery exit. He waited in the corridor outside. Elder Saith came out 3 minutes later, alone. She saw him and did not slow her pace, but also did not change course. He fell into step beside her, which was either presumptuous or it wasn't, and he was about to find out which. Elder Sath, he said. I apologize for the informal approach. Informal is fine, she said. Her voice was low and precise. Formal would have required a request through compact channels, which would have been reviewed, which would have added 3 days. He looked at her. She looked ahead. You knew I wanted to speak with you, he said. I noticed you in the observer gallery yesterday. You were watching me, not the proceedings. People who watch proceedings take notes. You were not taking notes. He considered that. I was taking a different kind of note. She stopped walking. They were in a side corridor. Quiet. The kind of space that exists in every large administrative building and is never quite as empty as it looks. Show me, she said. He handed her the data pad. She looked at it. The numbers were large. 80 years of licensing fees, above-market docking payments, rerouted trade credits, all accumulating in a holding account under a trust structure that compact financial surveillance had never flagged because it had been constructed, piece by piece, to look like routine commercial activity from a dozen different human firms. She was still for a long time. Not the trained stillness he had observed in the conclave hall. Something different. Something that looked, from the outside, like a person trying to hold a large thing without letting it show on their face. The antivirals, she said finally. For Verith, 7. And 6 other colonies, he said. We found all of them. She handed the data pad back. Her hands, he noticed, were not quite steady. You have been building this for 80 years, she said. The office has. I'm new to the file. He paused. We do not think of it as building something. We think of it as carrying something. Until the right moment to set it down. She looked at him then. Really looked, the way people do when they are deciding something. What is the right moment? She asked. The conclave ends in 4 days, he said. The filing window for third-party guarantee interventions under compact charter law opens on the final day. It closes 6 hours later. She understood. He could see it in the way her expression did not change, which was itself a form of response. "You have the documentation," she said. 12,000 pages, ready to file. The corridor was quiet around them. Somewhere further down the station, the conclave was resuming. Delegates were moving back to their seats. The Draythan consul was preparing to present the next cycle's debt schedule for the protectorate species, which would be detailed and accurate and almost impossible to escape. "You were waiting," Elder Saith said. "Not a question." "We were ready," Solon said. "There's a difference." She was quiet for a moment longer. "Yes," she said. "There is." The clause was on page 412. Not buried, that was the elegant part. It was right there. In clean official language, in a section titled Times Obligations of Debt Succession and Third-Party Standing, which was exactly the kind of heading that made people's eyes slide off a page and on to the next one. The Draythan Compact's founders had written it to formalize the process by which a debtor civilization could be absorbed when no other party held prior claim. They had not considered that the clause worked in both directions. If a third party could demonstrate prior undisclosed obligation to a protectorate species, meaning a debt that predated the Compact's acquisition of that species, and had never been formally registered, that third party could file as guarantor. And a guarantor, under Compact charter law, had standing to intervene in the debt proceedings, to contest the terms, to propose an alternative structure. The Draythan had written that provision to prevent rival powers from poaching their acquisitions through manufactured debt claims. They had written it carefully, with specific evidentiary requirements, because they had not wanted it abused. Those evidentiary requirements were exactly what 12,000 pages of human documentation satisfied. Solon filed on the 4th day of the conclave, 20 minutes after the window opened. He did it from a small office he had borrowed from the human trade delegation. A plain room with a plain desk and a wall screen that showed the station's exterior view, stars and docking arms and the quiet movement of ships. 2 people from the Office of Historical Obligations were present via secure link, their faces small in the corner of his display. They had not slept. Neither had he. He hit submit. The filing registered. The Compact's legal intake system acknowledged receipt. Then, for about 40 seconds, nothing happened. Then 3 different administrative alerts fired simultaneously in the Draythan Compact's legal division. He could not see that, but he knew it was happening. The formal response came 6 hours later, which was fast, faster than standard processing, which told him the Compact had immediately understood something unusual had landed. The response was a challenge brief, 17 grounds for rejection, presented in clean, precise language that radiated the confidence of an institution that had never lost a filing challenge in its own courts. Solon forwarded it to the office without comment. They replied in 2 hours. "We concede ground 7. Date discrepancy. Manifest ref. 447 C. Error on our end. We hold the other 16. He read that and felt something settle in his chest. Not relief too early for relief. Something more like the feeling of a foundation being confirmed solid underfoot. The Draythan legal team was good. They were genuinely good, and he respected that, the way you can respect an opponent's skill without changing what you intend to do. They found 3 additional technical challenges over the following 48 hours. Each time, the office responded. Each time, the human position held. The Compact's legal division was not panicking, not yet. But they were working harder than they had expected to work, which in an institution like theirs was itself a form of disruption. Elder Saith watched the proceedings from the Protectorate gallery. She had been informed, Solon had made sure of that, but she could not be a visible participant. The filing had to be a human action. That was what gave it standing. Her involvement had to remain what it had always been, the original act of kindness that had started everything, recorded in footnotes, witnessed by no one, which was now the foundation of every argument the human lawyers were making. On the 3rd day of the legal challenge, the Draythan consul, not the young careful one, but the senior consul, the one who ran the proceedings, requested an informal meeting. Solon agreed. They met in a reception room off the main conclave hall, the kind of room designed for exactly this type of conversation. Neutral, quiet, with 2 chairs, and a low table, and the unspoken agreement that nothing said here would appear in the official record. The consul was a large man by Drathan standards, which meant he took up space in a way that was probably meant to be felt. He had the look of someone who had been navigating institutional power for a very long time and was comfortable with most of what it required. He was not comfortable right now. "I will be direct," the consul said, which Solon had learned. In years of diplomatic work, usually meant the opposite was about to happen. "Please," Solon said. "This filing is an anomaly. The evidentiary record is unusual. The legal structure is," he paused, "creative. It is standard charter law," Solon said. "We applied it as written. You applied it in a way it has never been applied before. That is not the same as incorrectly." The consul looked at him. There was something in that look that was almost curious, the expression of a man trying to locate the edge of something, and finding the edge kept moving. "What do you want?" he asked. The question was genuine. What is the human agenda here? What are you building toward? Solon considered this. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to give the honest one, which sometimes takes a moment to find the right shape. "We want the Vethera debt schedule restructured under guarantor terms," he said. "We want the cultural archive materials, currently held in compact administrative storage, transferred to Vethera custody. We want the 3 colony stations classified as protectorate infrastructure, reclassified as sovereign assets. And in exchange?" "Nothing," Solon said. "We are not in exchange for anything. We are fulfilling an obligation." The consul stared at him. "An obligation from 300 years ago," he said. "An obligation is an obligation," Solon said. "We don't think the age changes what it is." There was a long silence. The consul was doing the thing that powerful people do when the situation has moved in a direction they did not plan for, and they are trying to locate the new edges before responding. Solon waited. He was good at waiting. "The filing will be reviewed by the full legal panel," the consul said finally. "We expect that," Solon said. "We are prepared for it." The consul stood. The meeting was over. He paused at the door. "You have been preparing for a long time," he said. Not quite a question. "Long enough," Solon said. After the consul left, Solon sat for a moment in the quiet room. He thought about the Vethera cargo manifests. He thought about 60,000 people on a colony that should have died, who lived because a quiet species of archivists had rerouted a shipment and asked for nothing back. He thought about what it meant to be the kind of civilization that did something like that, and filed it under routine. He thought about what it meant to be the kind of civilization that remembered. He sent one message to the office, holding all 16 grounds. Proceeding to full panel. The reply came fast this time. "Good. This is what we built it for." The legal panel ruled on a Tuesday. It ruled in humanity's favor on 14 of 16 grounds. The remaining 2 were deferred pending additional documentation, which the Office of Historical Obligations provided within 72 hours. The final ruling came down 11 days after the initial filing. The Vethera debt schedule was to be restructured under third-party guarantor terms. The cultural archive materials transferred. The 3 colony stations reclassified. No ceremony. No announcement. A legal document, filed and registered. Dry and precise and completely unremarkable in its language. It changed everything anyway. Solon was not present for the ruling. He had left the station 3 days earlier, reassigned to a trade monitoring post in a different sector, because his work at the conclave had been classified as administrative and complete. His supervisor had sent a brief message acknowledging the filing outcome. Good outcome, clean work. That was all. He was already on a transport when the ruling came through, sitting in a middle seat with a cup of something warm, reading through the next assignment briefing. He did not mind. He had not done it to be present for the ending. But the ending was not, as it turned out, an ending. The first signal came from a species called the HFY small traders. 3 generations under compact protectorate status, operating a cluster of mining stations in a corridor that humanity's shipping lanes did not touch. A junior diplomat from their administrative office sent a message to the human embassy on a compact adjacent station. The message was carefully worded. It did not use the words times, filing times, or times, guarantor times, or times, third-party intervention. It said, essentially, we would like to ask some questions about interstellar contract law. The embassy forwarded it to the Office of Historical Obligations. The office replied. The second signal came from the Tesson, an agricultural species whose food export routes had been quietly restructured over the previous 2 decades to route through compact taxed corridors. They did not send a message. They sent a historian, an older woman who arrived at a human research station and asked, with great politeness, if anyone there had access to trade archive records from the early compact expansion era. She was given access. She spent 4 days in the archive room. She left without saying anything further. The office noted her visit. They already had a file on the Tesson. They had files on most of the protectorate species. They had been building those files for a very long time, going through old records the way Solon went through old ledgers, looking for the same pattern. A kindness, unrecorded, unrewarded, filed under routine, and forgotten by everyone except the people who received it. The pattern, it turned out, was not rare. Humanity had been moving through the galaxy for a long time. In that time, it had done many things, built stations, lost colonies, negotiated badly, negotiated well, made enemies, made allies, failed dramatically, and recovered quietly. It had also, in ways that no one had ever assembled into a single picture, helped people. Not always intentionally, not always wisely, but consistently the way that any civilization with a strong instinct toward problem-solving helps. Because when they see something broken, they try to fix it. And they don't always think to write it down properly when they do. Someone had been writing it down. The Drathan Compact did not fracture. Solon had not expected it to a structure that large does not break from a single legal ruling, no matter how cleanly won. What happened was subtler. The ruling had demonstrated something that could not be easily undemonstrated, that the Compact's own legal framework contained a mechanism that worked against them if the evidentiary record was strong enough. That mechanism had always been there. They had written it themselves, but no one had ever had the documentation to use it before. Now other species knew it existed. The arithmetic changed. Not loudly, not all at once, but in the quiet offices of a dozen small civilizations, people who had been doing the calculation of whether escape was possible and arriving, always. At no began doing it again, with a new variable included. Auman variable. Solon heard about some of this secondhand, in messages from colleagues and occasional updates from the office. He did not hear about all of it. He was on his new assignment, doing work that looked exactly like the work he had always done, attending meetings, filing reports, watching large things move, and it looked that way because it was that way. He was not the center of what was happening. No one person was. That was not how the office worked. That was not, he had come to understand, how humanity worked when it was working at its best, not through singular heroes or decisive moments, but through patience, accumulation, a long memory, and the organizational discipline to act on it at the right time. He was in a transit lounge on the 3rd day after the ruling when he heard, through a public news feed, that the first Vethera cultural station had reopened. It was a small item. Brief. The station had been closed for over a century, its archives held in compact administrative storage under a classification that amounted to slow erasure. Now, it was open. The item did not mention humans. It did not mention the filing or the ruling or the legal challenge. It said only that the station had been returned to Vethara administration and would operate as a public archive and educational resource. Solon read it twice. Then he set down his cup and walked to the viewport and stood there for a while, watching the ships move. He thought about Elder Sath. He wondered if she was there, at the station, for its opening. He thought probably she was, and that probably she did not make a speech, because that was not how she moved through the world. She would just be present, watching her people walk through the doors of something that had been theirs all along. He did not send her a message. There was nothing to say that the moment was not already saying better than he could. He sent one message to the office instead. Short, as they tended to be. Ledger balanced. The reply came in 4 minutes. We have 14 others in queue. He looked at that for a moment. Then he put his datapad away, picked up his cup again, and watched the ships. 14 others. He thought about what that meant. 14 other species, somewhere in the galaxy, that humanity had helped in ways that had been filed under routine and forgotten. 14 other deaths, waiting in the books. 14 other moments, somewhere ahead, when the right person would find the right footnote and sit with it for a long time, in a quiet office. He thought about all the people who had built the office's files, year after year, decade after decade, doing work that looked like nothing from the outside. He thought about the professor from the academy who had told his class, half bored, that the true story of any civilization was in its invoices. He finished his tea. His transport was boarding in 20 minutes. He had a new assignment to get to. 18 months after the ruling, the Drathan Compact requested a formal diplomatic meeting with humanity. Not about the Vethara. That matter was settled, filed, and legally closed. The Compact did not reopen closed things that was one of their institutional disciplines. And it was, Solon had to admit, a good one. They moved forward. They adapted. They had been operating long enough to understand that the cost of holding on to a loss was usually higher than the cost of incorporating it. The meeting was about trade access, infrastructure partnership, a proposal to co-develop a supply corridor in a sector where human logistics networks had quietly become, over the previous several decades, more reliable than anyone had formally acknowledged. The compact needed what humanity had built. They were prepared to negotiate for it in good faith. It was a routine meeting, professional, the kind of meeting that produced long documents and modest agreements and very little that anyone would later describe as interesting. Humanity sent a representative named Counselor Adis Ferrum, who was experienced and thorough, and had a talent for the specific kind of patience that trade negotiations require. The Drathan consul was young and careful, and had been chosen, visibly, to signal that the compact was looking forward. Neither of them mentioned the Vethara ruling. Solon Adair was not there. He was 3 sectors away, attending a different summit, doing the same work he had always done. The meeting on his assignment log was listed as a routine trade monitoring session. His report afterward would be 2 pages, accurate, and unlikely to be read by anyone above his immediate supervisor. He was, by most measures, still unremarkable. He was fine with that. On a Vethara station, the Cultural Archive, newly reopened, still smelling faintly of the renovation work that had taken 6 months, and 3 teams of specialists. An old archivist, named Thesson, was teaching. His students were 3 children, somewhere between 7 and 10 in Vethara years, sitting cross-legged on low cushions, in a room whose walls were lined with physical text, real printed material, actual old documents behind sealed transparent panels, things that had survived because the humans had archived them before the compact's administrative period had turned archiving into erasure. Thesson was teaching them the old script, the written form of their ancestral language, which had not been in regular use for 2 generations, because the compact's administrative language had replaced it in all official contexts. The children were struggling with the letter forms. They found it funny when they got them wrong, a good sign, Thesson thought. The kind of children who laughed at their own mistakes were the kind who kept trying. He was patient with them. He had been an archivist for 50 years. Patience was not something he had to work at anymore. Solon Adair happened to be walking past the open doorway on his way to a transit connection at the station's far end. He had a bag over one shoulder and a datapad in his other hand. He was reading the datapad, which contained his next briefing, and he almost walked past without looking up. Something made him pause.